And now it's Europe's turn to worry about Sweden, a European nation with a balance of power due to be disrupted by the rise of far-right populists, the Sweden Democrats, a neo-Nazi rooted formation that has rebranded itself. It's expected to pick off votes from the center-left and the center-right in next Sunday's general election. There's blowback in the nation that per capita took in the most refugees in 2015. Fact is that with nearly 1 in 6 Swedes foreign-born, the country is changing, and so is its long-touted social and economic model. Its century-old welfare state took a first blow, you might say, with the financial crash of the 1990s. Then there was 2008. The public-private partnerships that have ensued have not always gone to plan, with basic services like transport and healthcare under strain. We're also talking about a country that this summer was literally burning. In the home stretch of the campaign, surveys suggest the environment has overtaken identity issues as the number one concern of citizens, coming off a major drought that triggered Sweden's worst forest fires on record. What will be the decider when the ballots are cast on Sunday? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what's the matter with Sweden. Joining us from Stockholm, Anders Lindberg, editor of the political desk at Aftonbladet newspaper. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Also joining us from the Swedish capital.
Do you see me?
Yes, we can see you. Sarah Skidedal, a national board member of the Christian Democrats Party. Thank you for joining us. And from Brussels, Danish diplomat Klaus Sorensen, former Director General at the European Commission. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. It's a bit like Germany, where last year's entry of the far right to parliament crowded the field and ensured that only minority governments can henceforth rule that country. When we're talking about Sweden, well, the field was already crowded in the outgoing Riksdag. That's the parliament, with the Social Democrats leading that outgoing government. The polls now show that the party that first came to power in 1914 is losing ground, both to the center-right and to the far right in the final days of campaigning. So we already know, Anders Lindberg, before the ballots have even been cast, that it's going to be a minority government.
Yeah, we have a tradition in Sweden of minority governments, but after time they tend to get weaker and weaker. And we have had this kind of minority government with the Sweden Democrats in the parliament since 2010. First with Fredrik Reinfeldt, the conservative prime minister, and now with Stefan Löfven, the social democratic prime minister. But both these governments were minority governments. And we're looking at one more period with minority government, but it's up to this point completely unclear how the political landscape will look. The Sweden Democrats look like they're going to be up to maybe 20%, which is, of course, a dramatic shift. They might be the second largest party at this point. And that will completely disrupt the traditional Swedish balance, where the Social Democrats and the Conservatives either held the kind of second or largest party spot.
Anders, you've covered a lot of campaigns. What strikes you about this one?
Mainly that it's about nothing. It's a campaign without a purpose and without a theme. From the very start, you can say that the government issue have been the kind of core issue in the campaign. Who should govern? Who should be prime minister? It started off with the forest fires, as you said in your introduction. We have seen forest fires all over Sweden, basically, mostly in the northern part. And that changed the dynamics of the environment as an issue. I think most people thought that this should be an election about migration because of the migration crisis in 2015. But I would say it's a migration is there still, but environment is also there, healthcare is there, schools are there. So you can say that there is no clean issue. There's not kind of one purpose in this campaign, and that's a very big difference from previous campaigns, because that means that that's not one single issue that the voters will decide on. So you will have a very crowded field. You would have eight parties in parliament, and that will necessarily create a situation for the next government, which will be quite problematic to form the government, but even more problematic to get the policies through, because the Sweden Democrats have this time said that they will not accept being passive supporter role of any government, which means that they will claim policies, they will claim changes in the Swedish political certain issues. And that is historically completely unacceptable for all other parties. There is a kind of cordon sanitaire between the other parties and the Sweden Democrats. So it will be very interesting to see sort of who breaks their promise on the government issue first.
Cyrus Kittedal, will your party, the Christian Democrats, break the promise and perhaps do business with the far right?
For us, we sent a clear message to the voters that we will either way support the center-right Prime Minister candidate, Ulf Kristersson. And for us, we will not negotiate with the Sweden Democrats. But we also think that, and I agree with Anders to some extent, that this election has been mainly about politics rather than policy. And I think for us, it's more important to get our policies through than to make the Sweden Democrats the center of all political discussion.
Make them the center of all political discussion. And there's something of a Cheshire cat grin when you hear the leader of the Social Democrats. Everyone else saying they're not going to do business with him. If you listen though to him, he's been saying that he's already dictating the conversation. Let's listen.
It's how the other parties act and talk about us. This whole political gathering was characterized by how the other parties relate to us. One doesn't want to talk to us, but one is happy to talk about us.
Cyrus Kittedal, your reaction when you hear that?
Well, I think this is the whole reason that it's benefiting them, because I think that if we had an election campaign that were more involved with the political issues, and I think that the Sweden Democrats wouldn't gain as much voters as they are right now. And I think a lot of blame is to do with the media, I must say, because I think the political parties are actually trying to promote their solutions for better healthcare in Sweden, or their solutions for the environment. But these topics aren't getting the attention. Rather, everyone just wants to focus on the new government situation after the election. And I think it's important to get answers. But from my party, we already been very clear. We will not negotiate with the Sweden Democrats, but we will not avoid putting our policies there and having them approved with the support of the Sweden Democrats either.
Claes Sorensen, your thoughts on how do you avoid nowadays in Europe, in a political campaign, that the more stringent views, the more strident views, get the most attention? How do you do it so that the far right doesn't grab the attention, doesn't set the agenda?
I believe there are two important factors that we are all grappling with. The first is that the voter population, and I think it goes for all over Europe, is much more mobile today than they were in the generations past. And the second factor is that because of the rapidity of the news cycle and the new tools, we tend to run like rabbits after the issue of the day, and it's very complicated actually to shape a cohesive, holistic proposal to the voters in this climate of news cycles 24 hours. So the quality of the delivery of politics is actually challenged deeply. So I don't have an answer to you. I think the electorate will grow up and come to realize that it's not actually by running after rabbits that you can devise long-term sustainable policies. You need to solve the challenges of the changing society, of demographics, of the health system, of the schools, of migration. And there are issues that have to be dealt with, integration of the newcomers. And these are complex issues that cannot be sort of dealt with just by moving your hands or running after this and that profit of the day. So it's a challenge to democracy.
Challenge to democracy, and your words echo the conversations we had last year when there were elections here in France, when there were elections in Germany, the speed with which the news cycle goes, the speed of change more broadly. Let's give an example now about that change. The mines have long since closed in tiny Ljungansberg County, excuse my pronunciation, in central Sweden, where the unemployment rate of 13% is more than double the national rate. There, the resentment is palpable against asylum seekers who get subsidized welfare, housing, 71 crowns, a little over €7 a day for food and other essentials. In what was a social democrat bastion, residents there worry about change.
Population decrease, first and foremost. Then we've had a very high immigration here. I think it's the highest in Sweden, and I mean that puts a strain on everything.
In what way?
Housing, healthcare, schools. It strains the council in every possible way with the social services and language, and yes, everything basically. Everything that has got anything to do with social services.
Anders Lindberg, that gap between the haves and the have-nots, are you feeling it in this campaign?
Yes, I think that's quite obvious, and I think that we see a repetition both of the if you look at the French campaigns, you look at the Brexit debate and the Brexit campaign, you look at the victory of Donald Trump. All the time you see this Rust Belt or these areas which is maybe traditionally have been social democratic or left leaning, now going forward voting for right-wing populist parties. You see this very clearly in this campaign, and you will have municipalities in Sweden where the Sweden Democrats will be bigger than the Social Democrats from these traditional areas. So you can clearly see that the financial crisis and the migration crisis, both at the same time coming sort of to an effect in this election. And then you have a number of people that are disenfranchised. The difference between France, Great Britain, and the United States in Sweden is that the economy in Sweden is going extremely well. So you still have kind of the economic motor going also for these areas. So I think you will not have this really dramatic effects that you've seen in the rest of Europe, where the Social Democrats maybe been like 7% in some countries. But you're seeing the kind of same structures that resulted in this in other countries coming in Sweden. And maybe not in this election, but if you go forward 2 or 3 elections, you will see much more of an effect if the politicians doesn't respond to these people that feel kind of left out or left behind by globalization, by changing world.
Well, let's listen carefully to how the current Prime Minister is responding, as you say, to those concerns. Stefan Löfven is a Social Democrat. He's asking voters for more time after the 2014 return of his party to power.
During our 4 years in government, we've halved the time it takes for recently arrived migrants to enter the job market. We've halved the time, and we're going to continue. This is based on faster language learning, which we've already started to do because it's essential to learn Swedish in order to access the job market faster.
Anders Lindberg, how's that message getting across? Is it effective?
No, it's not. And the reason it's not, it's that a lot of part of that message is about what the government have done. And voters tend not to vote as a kind of thank you message for what the government has done the last time. The voters want to see what the government should do in the future. And very much of this integration debate or migration debate, it is 2-3 years back in time. So it's not it's hard to sort of use that and have a positive future message for the government. And this is one of the reasons that they have not been able to win this debate. Luckily for the government, the narrative have changed from this migration debate to environment, to healthcare, to other issues. So now you have both environment, in both migration and other issues in the campaign. If this campaign only would have been on migration, the result for the government would have been worse. But you can already see that this sort of narrative changed. And I think personally that the forest fires made a big difference, because then people found each other in a way. People started cooperating in Sweden, and people started to realize that there is other issues to discuss. But basically from 2015 to the summer of 2018, we basically only discussed immigration and crime. And so what we see in this election is kind of 3 years of debate coming to a close. It's not like just the election campaign, it's all this period that's sort of coming now. And then the effective from the government so far has not been so effective.
The message from the government, ineffective. Sarah Skittedal, at the same time, you just heard Anders say the economy is doing well. So why is it that all the discussion about identity politics looms so large?
Well, I think the economy is going to be on decline, and I think everyone sees that as well. And I think I actually think that the reason that the populists are making new grounds are the lack of action from the established parties regarding policies such as both migration, but also in other parts of the society where they think that we're failing. And I think this is the reason that we see the death of some of the political movements all around in the Western world, that we're seeing the lack of political reforms as a way to, we've been trying to avoid responsibility for difficult issues that the voters are concerned on. And I'm not surprised that we're being punished now by the voters for a lack of action. And I actually think that it's a huge possibility that the Sweden Democrats will not only be the second largest party, but actually the largest. We've seen these surprises in all other Western
Western nations
countries,
before.
So
we're going to pick up on that point, Sarah, when we come back. We have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. We're going to take a very quick break. Apologies for that. We'll be right back. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Europe holding its breath ahead of elections, this time in Sweden. They take place on Sunday, and here to talk about it with us from Stockholm, Anders Lindberg, who is the editor of the political desk at Aftonbladet newspaper, also in the Swedish capital. Sarah Skittedal, national board member of the Christian Democrats Party, the KD. Joining us from Brussels, Danish diplomat Klaus Sorensen, former Director General at the European Commission. And for part two of our discussion, we're pleased to welcome Tove Liftendahl, who is the politics editor at another Swedish daily, who joins us from Uppsala, from Swedish Daily. In fact, that's the name of it. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Just before the break, Anders Lindberg, Tove, was saying how the forest fires changed the conversation during the campaign. You agree?
I think that the forest fight could have been a game changer. It wasn't used by the politicians as well as it could. There was an interesting piece in a news web paper called Quarterly, which talked about how the different party leaders have acted in this crisis. Seeing both the prime minister and the largest opposition leader and also the center party leader traveling out to the areas, speaking with empathy.
Tove, I'm gonna unfortunately have to interrupt because we're having sound issues. We're gonna try to reconnect with Uppsala. Apologies for that, but we're having technical trouble on the line with the audio. We'll try to have that fixed as soon as possible. Klaus Sorensen, it's true that the focus tends to be on identity politics and not enough on the environment. Your thoughts on how those forest fires may have changed the way the campaign is going?
Well, I think seen from Brussels, this was actually a very good example of how European cooperation could contribute to helping the Swedes. We sent loads of planes up from France and Italy. This is a kind of solidarity that we haven't seen 10 years ago. And obviously, it brings back the whole question of climate change that has sort of disappeared from the discussion. And I think it came at a good moment also because although it's a disaster, the fact that it came at this moment when we have seen a decline in the migration flows, it actually offers an opportunity for a more relaxed debate of different issues. And then we have to come back to health issues and so on. I would like to say also that on migration, Sweden has actually taken a lot of people in. They have been able to do it quite successfully. They have actually done a good job in putting them into work, and they are doing more. And I think it's a story that is undertold in other countries. Then there are issues about integration, how people learn language fast, etc. And I think all over Europe, we have to understand that the Syrian crisis and people coming from Afghanistan and so on, it's not the last migration flow we will see. There will be other things coming. So we have to really have some intelligent and comprehensive policies on all of that.
And yet you heard Sarah Skittedal say
rather primitive.
Klaus Sorensen, you heard Sarah Skittedal say just before the break that on Sunday night we may wind up with the far right being the first party in the parliament.
Well, I think I cannot judge. I think it's if she has those fears, I think they will be fears also in the electorate. So probably it's a good idea to say if you don't go out to vote, something very unusual may happen, and then we will have to deal with that. But I'm not sure that necessarily it will be that much of a landslide. Let's see. Let's stay cool. Let's hope the debate will continue to become more sensible and that people come up with real solutions. And then I'm hopeful that a stable country like Sweden can sort itself out.
Klaus, the fear is, and you heard Anders Lindberg say it in part one of our discussion, that politicians always seem to be playing catch up. We saw last week France's president visit your native Denmark and praise the flexi-security model of the Danes. We've heard on the campaign trail, Jimmy Åkesson, the head of the far right, praising the fact that in Denmark you have the niqab ban. How are mainstream politicians reacting to the fears over identity, over immigration, over integration?
Well, I think in all politics there's an element of surprise, and then there is a catch-up problem. The point is, what do you do when you don't have surprises coming in? Do you plan well for your transport system? Do you plan well on your health system? Are you having a capacity to think long-term? And I think this is the crucial issue. Then there will always be these kind of frustrations that, hey, we didn't foresee that, and so on. And obviously, the crisis in Syria came as a shock, and the moves over the Mediterranean came as a shock and as a surprise. And we realized that we should be better in control. I think it's very important for a government, and I'm not here to give lessons to anybody because we all have challenges, but to be seen as being in control. It doesn't mean that you have to build walls. It doesn't mean that you have to go to drastic measures, but you need an answer, and you need it very fast when you have these surprises. So I think actually we have a capacity to do that, and Sweden, being a very stable country, has shown that over many, many years. So I just hope that these upheavals that we see will be something that we will have to deal with, but over the medium term, we will come to good solutions. And we would do it collectively in Europe. It's not only in Sweden that we have these challenges, we also have them in Italy. In France, we saw that the flight towards the extremes actually was stopped, partly because there was a pretty coherent proposal from the center. Now it's about execution. We'll see how that goes. I wish good luck, but at least it shows that even in our modern societies with a short news cycle, you can actually mobilize the electorate with good proposals. So I'm confident. It's not that I'm not worried. I'm confident that we can manage.
Anders Lindberg, you reassured?
I'm quite reassured when it comes to Sweden. I think that the Swedish society has a very high degree of organization. We have an enormously strong civil society. And what we saw in the migration crisis, and then we go back to 2015, was that the civil society, like the churches, like the Red Cross, Save the Children, but also an enormous number of voluntary people stepped in and took over the reception of people, and also integrate them quite quickly into kind of a Swedish structural system with both the legal system and physically to get people to schools, training, learning Swedish, etc. The key problem that we will have is getting people to work. And as the clip you played with Stefan Löfven, when he says that we have actually created 300,000 new jobs during this last period, the last 4 years. That is true. And it's also true that the period before that, the Conservative government created 250,000 more jobs, which actually means that in 8 years' time, there is more than 500,000 new jobs in Sweden, which means that we have an economy that can adapt, that can take these people in. But you need policies to make that happen. And up to this point, that has been one of the issues in the election campaign. I am confident that the system will work because Sweden is quite good in organizing this. But
all right, confident. Let me interrupt you on that point.
A number of years,
let me interrupt you on that point, Anders Lindberg, because you heard just before that Klaus Sorensen talking about core issues, things like good transport, good healthcare. The Swedish model. Everybody here in Europe and in the rest of Europe, we all look towards the Swedish model as this amazing system where you have a welfare state that is both productive and takes care of its citizens. But many of those voting say that it's under strain. We'll give the example of healthcare, where there's right now a shortage of doctors and nurses. This in a nation that spends well above the average inside of the EU when it comes to healthcare.
Sweden has a fast-growing and aging population, and we have educated too few people who can work in the healthcare sector to meet the needs.
Sarah Skyttedal, the criticism is that Swedish model that we think of, not delving into the weeds in the rest of Europe, is not really the Swedish model that exists today, that it's a lot of things have been privatized, public-private partnerships, and sometimes it's not as efficient as it should be with things like the healthcare system, transportation.
Yeah, I think that the Swedish society hasn't been successful due to high taxes and a big welfare state, but despite of it. And the reason for that is the high amount of trust within the Swedish society. And what we're seeing right now with these big divides, especially between immigrants and native-born Swedes, we're seeing that this is making a disrupt in the trust between people. And I think we need to make reforms on the labor market, as Anders is talking about, but this gap is also a cultural gap, and I think we need to make a break with the multiculturalist policies that has been promoting parallel societies to evolve in our country.
Is the problem multiculturalism, or is the problem too much privatization after the financial crisis of the 1990s?
I don't see private alternatives as a problem. Right now, we're lacking alternatives in the healthcare system, and opening up for private enterprise to get into the healthcare system is making this solution being solved much easier. But I see that a lot due to the migration that has been on such a high level, but also in other parts of society, the Swedish model is not really adapted for the future labor market. And I think that we see a lot of lack of reforms, especially from the center right. I think, and this is also one of the reasons that identity policy has been so much in focus, because the traditional parties on the classical economical scale between left and right have moved so close to each other, and this has mostly been agreement on things. And especially the moderate party did a big rebranding as the new moderate party, pretty much similar to Tony Blair's Blue Labour, but the opposite.
So if you're talking about rethinking,
we're witnessing this, and I think what we need right now is to.
If you're talking about rethinking multiculturalism, how would you do it? What do you mean?
I don't hear you right now.
I'm saying if you were talking about a rethink of Sweden's multicultural model,
I think we need
how would you do it?
Realize. I think we need to define what is the core of Swedish society, and to make clear stance on what you need to adopt to be a part of this society. And it's about gender equality. It's about views on the freedom of speech or freedom of religion. And I think we need to make sure that people who want to be part of this society will be included in these ideas. And I think also we need to be clear that even though you can keep your own culture, I think to some extent with some cultural habits will make it harder for you to enter the society and be part of both the labor market, but also to make new acquaintances in this country. And I think we're not really helping people when we're sending the message that you don't need to adapt at all.
Reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. This one from Kate, who says, I think of Sweden as a bastion of liberalism and social democracy. That's not the case anymore, is it? Anders Lindberg, your reaction to what you've just heard there from Sarah Skittedal.
I think that this is one of the major conflicts in the campaign, because the left and right conflict is something we know. We know the debate about privatization. We know the debate about selling out public companies or raising taxes or lowering taxes. It's familiar debates. The Swedish public is quite used to them. What's driving these new debates is the issue of multiculturalism and the issue of Islam in Swedish society. And there is a fundamental difference in views. The view from the right at this point now is that we should have more of an assimilation policy. People that have come to Sweden has to adapt to much more of the Swedish society than historically have been the case. If you go back to the 50s, 60s, we had that policy. So it's not completely new, but it clashes with the kind of modern open society approach that we have had for the last 10, 20, 30 years, maybe. And so this is a break with a kind of integration model where people are integrated, but we still have a multicultural idea. So this is one of the major clashes. If I look at Kate's question about Sweden is not a bastion of liberalism anymore, I would say come to Sweden, because if you would come here, you would realize that it is. We're still kind of the most liberal country in the world. We're still the most secular country in the world. When we have these debates, it's from a completely different level than most of other parts of Europe. When we speak of the debate about no-go zones, for example, in Sweden, if you would come from a French banlieue, I can't pronounce it, but when you come from a French suburb of this kind to a Swedish one, you would notice an enormous difference. So we have these debates, but the level of standard of living, the level of work market integration, the number of women that from foreign backgrounds that actually work in Sweden is so much higher than other parts of Europe. So we have the same kind of cultural conflicts, but we have them more on, at least in my view, very much on a symbolic level. We debate, for example, the Muslim call to prayer, not as a principal issue, maybe, but as an issue in one municipality, in one place in Sweden that wants to have one call to prayer for 1 hour every Friday. 3 minutes every Friday. That is the major debate here. And that is what creates this kind of symbolic debates that we have been preoccupied with for like the last 3 years. And the Christian Democrats, for example, as Sarah Skyttedal comes from, or the Sweden Democrats or the Conservative Party, they have very much debated those issues for a long time. And I think that that's one of the things that, for example, the Christian Democrats are gaining on at this point, that they are familiar with these issues. And now when the voters are interested in them, many voters look to these parties. So this is one of the key debates that we have in the election.
Tove Livdendal, do you agree?
To a certain extent, I think that what we are going through now is many things. It's like a perfect storm, and many things have already been mentioned. As Sarah Skyttedal was saying, our markets for labor and housing, they have been dysfunctional for a very long time, and now with the large influx of migrants, suddenly the systems cannot hold in a very good way. So we see the defects of our systems, and that of course will fuel debates which not always will be so analytic or emotional. But there has also been a large uneasiness to talk about these issues, and I don't think that you should underestimate the fact that so many in Sweden now live in totally separate realities. You can see it in result of schools, where you have those that will follow the middle class, that the children will do well and they will have good schools. And then you will have other parts where you can see there are 15 persons from the staff not present one day, and where they fight to get at least half of the students to just finish with degrees that will make them go further. So I think Sweden, who is known for being this little, quite homogeneous country in the north, is now experiencing separate realities in a way that really challenge our self-image and that make us very uneasy. And
growth in inequality. I want to ask you about something. As a newspaper woman, the Reuters news agency reporting on a startling survey conducted by researchers at Oxford University, an inundation of stories that are either fake or distorted getting shared on social media. It says, roughly speaking, for every 2 professional content articles that are shared, 1 junk news article, as they call it, was shared. Junk news, therefore, constituted a significant part of the conversation around the Swedish general election. The survey mentions 3 websites in particular that have a lot of this so-called junk news, and all of them are far right. Tops is a website called Samhällsnytt, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, which received donations through the personal bank account of a Sweden Democrat member for a couple of years. Is it just simply, Tove, that also populists are cannier at using today's campaigning tools.
Yeah, but that is not a surprise. We are in this information warfare, in this information war now, and of course we have expected different forces to try to impact the debate. Perhaps we don't know yet if it will have some impact in the election result. It's difficult to say, but of course there are always constant fight over how to define the problems and what kind of truth you should really try to change. So this is not surprising for me. We also know that there are foreign powers who would like to affect our debate and constantly trying to do so. So not surprising, and that makes it even more important for what you say, traditional media to do their job, to be professional. And for a long time, I think there was a fair criticism that considering the main topic that made the Sweden Democrats grow so big as they are today, that there was almost a mirroring behavior between the large amount of the politicians and a large part of the media not wanting to talk about this issue, which, as I say, may make us uneasy.
Anders Lindberg, you agree that there could also be foreign powers trying to influence the campaign?
Most likely there are foreign powers, and it's Russia we're talking about, of course. We see quite clearly that this junk websites, as you mentioned, or fake news websites, as you mentioned, they're systematically used by the far-right parties, not only the Sweden Democrats, I should say. We have smaller far-right parties also. So they're used. But it's also what the Swedish authorities pointed out is that you've seen this with a combination of a number of other worrying signs. And one of them is that you can see the number of bots, automated accounts, that's starting to discuss Swedish issues. And Swedish election issues have boomed in the election campaign. And that method is something that we have seen before from elections in other countries. So I think that most people in Sweden that work with these issues suspect that there is a connection between the Swedish far-right and the Russian information warfare of the same kind as we have seen in the United States, in the Brexit campaign, etc. And the key with this, of course, the main problem with this is that it increases tensions in the Swedish society. There is no one in Sweden that will believe a Russian narrative, because Sweden has a deep-seated suspicion towards kind of the Russian authority and the Russian way of trying to influence our neighbors like Finland and the Baltic states. But what they can achieve is, of course, dividing the Swedish population. They can increase already existing divisions.
Unfortunately, Anders, we're going to have to leave it there. We're going to have to leave it there because, unfortunately, we've run out of time. So much to say. We'll, of course, continue to cover to the build-up to the vote on Sunday. Anders Lindberg in Stockholm, Sarah Skiddedal also in the Swedish capital, Tove Lindedahl in Uppsala, and Klaus Sorensen in Brussels. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.